So, Dave, thank you so much for popping on and joining me for what I think is going to be a pretty interesting conversation. For those people that don't know who Dave is, he's actually a triple threat. He is the CEO and founder of Gamestorming Group, which is an organization directly focused on trying to be able to figure out how to make collaboration work better, not just necessarily in an office, but outside of it as well. He's also got a brand new project called New Rules for Work, which I am very excited about getting into, which is probably going to be the focus of our 45 minutes together. And he's also a Running Remote attendee, an alumnist, which is very exciting as well. So, Dave, thanks a lot for coming on the show. First question that I've got for you: New Rules for Work. We were talking about it right before we jumped on. What's this all about? And it's not just kind of, if you look at the website, it's very different from the way that you described it. So I'd love to be able to hear your perspective on it.
Thanks, Liam, for having me. And good first question. So the New Rules for Work is essentially based on the premise that we fucked up work. And now we're trying to put it back together. I think it was fucked up before the pandemic, but the pandemic really amplified it for a lot of people and put it into perspective. Right. And I don't know when people will be listening to this, what we're recording on, I'm looking at
end of March.
I think we're at the end of March, right?
Yeah.
There's headlines every day about return to office policies and different CEOs mandating minimums. Minimum days, minimum time back in the office, and people don't want to go back into the office. So the New Rules for Work is essentially, it was a response to a very early study. I say early, it was released in April of 2022, saying if you want to be collaborative, if you want to be innovative, get back into the office. And me and my co-host, my co-host of this effort, her name is Elise Keith of Lucid Meetings. We didn't necessarily have, I would say, an objective concern about the outcome of the study. I think we were open, and we had our anecdotal hunches. We were more concerned about the methodology that was used in the original study, and that methodology not looking anything like we as practitioners have seen with our clients or with our colleagues. I may perhaps link to the study and people can go through and see the methodology for themselves. So we got together and we said, well, why don't we do our own study that merges an academic rigor of research, so something that we could publish and distill cogent insights from, but use for the experiment itself, use a more practitioner-oriented methodology, knowing what we know about how teams work together, how to create an environment built on trust, built on collaboration that really fosters creativity. So the New Rules for Work is really a staged project that is ultimately about research and developing some answers that people, the organizations, teams can use to whatever degree of autonomy they have to develop return to office, hybrid remote work policies.
Okay, well, I'm going to jump into the first question that I have for you, which is, you're probably in this quite a bit. You're committing a significant amount of your career towards getting an answer to this question. Remote, hybrid, or office? Which one for you?
Which one for me?
Yeah.
Over the course of my, I guess I've been working for 20 some odd years now. I've worked for distributed, completely remote companies. I've worked for in-office companies, and then I've had a mix of both. And I will say, for me, it was the mix of both that was the best. And so, there's different types of work that we have to do. There's I call it the heads down kind of work where I need focus and flow. And when I think of that optimal situation in the job, it was a consulting company. And so I needed to sometimes be either developing content, decks, recommendations, insights, and I needed to not be distracted. There was other times where it would make a lot of sense to be in the office with my team, and we would bounce ideas off one another. We would write stuff on the whiteboard. And there were other times where, of course, we needed to interface with the client. And it was cycling through those three different modes, really, client facing, team facing, and then alone, that I felt was optimal for me. There are certain things that you can do in person, just picking up on people's body languages, that you can't do in any other situation. Having said that, I think we are maybe shortchanging the virtual and or hybrid, although hybrid is difficult from, I would say, like a logistical or an operational standpoint. But I think we're still figuring out how to do those things right. But I think if you do them right, they can be as effective as when people say like, oh, I just need to be in the room because of that, they can't put their finger on it. I think we can get at it in a virtual setting with the right techniques. To me, I completely agree with you, and I think that actually this strict methodology of one must exist in one particular bucket is kind of ridiculous. I just came back from Dubai where we did our company retreat, and we had a couple hundred people in a space for about a week and a half. We got more work done, and we worked on more forms of trust. Like I felt, and especially because a lot of these team members were hired during the pandemic, so we've never seen them in person before, and just the context that we had gained pre and post is a massive change towards how we're going to operate our various businesses. So I agree with you that I think hybrid is the best model. I think, however, the ratio of that is probably the piece that is going to be important moving forward. One other question that I wanted to ask, kind of connected to this, which connects to your project, New Rules for Work. We were talking before we jumped on about what I would almost consider like a almost conspiratorial forms of propaganda on both sides of the spectrum, right? So you've got, I read a study by WeWork about a year and a half ago saying 96% of workers wanted to go back to the office. When you actually read the question, it was, do you want more work flexibility in where you work, right? So 96% of people said yes, but then WeWork decided to reinterpret that as saying 96% of people want to go to the office, at least some of the time, but they didn't mention that part. And then I just read, and Joel Gascoigne from Buffer, killer guy, absolute cornerstone of the remote work community. He's been at Running Remote a couple times. But his study was also taking a very skewed view of remote work because his entire database, the entire group of people that he was talking to, were remote work advocates. And the numbers were also saying 96% of people would take a $20,000 pay cut in order to be able to remain working remotely. Stats like that. Where do you see the best pieces of data as it applies to understanding whether we should be going back to the office or not? Because it is so difficult right now because people are throwing propaganda left, right, and center, and we really don't understand where's the data with academic rigor that we can really trust. So we were also just talking about the Future Forum, right? That I guess Benioff and that consortium announced that they were just shutting down. And I think there's some good data in there. I would also trust, I don't know, everybody's gut is different. I was going to say trust your gut. But what that data was pointing to, and this is kind of secondhand through a contact of ours that we've been working with as an advisor on our project, was we've kind of phrased it as the why-based where. And adults don't like being told what to do, right? Nobody, we just don't. And so if you have the flexibility, but also the control of your schedule, I think what we're seeing the data show, and this is I'm trying to strictly adhere. I want to give you a direct answer to your question. So going back to that future form data, people will go into the office if you give them a reason, as the company as a person, or personify the company and like, look, it's our understanding certain things can be better if we're in the office. And I'm not saying all the time here. I'm saying, that hybrid approach come in a few times. But then you also give people the control to figure out when on their smaller teams that they want to do that. So, I think we're seeing a lot of software cropping up that helps people or it helps teams figure out when they might want to come in to the office and be together. Because they realize, I think a lot of people, I think very few are at the extremes, which is I want to be in the office all the time or I want to be home all the time. I think a lot of people are in the middle of that. And where you're seeing the resistance is don't tell me when to come in, right? I think that's where people don't want to come in, and they may appear more extreme than they are. But if you give them the flexibility and if you give them a reason, and if the in-office experience is going to be different than what they're going to do at home, in other words, I'm not going to be taking Zoom calls when I go into the office because I could have been doing that at home. You can hit that hybrid sweet spot. So we think of it as the why-based where. I think we used to just assume work got done in the office, and if you were going to be remote, that was more of the exception. So a stakeholder was on holiday and they were going to dial in for a call, but otherwise 99% of the people that we needed in the meeting or the workshop are here. But now if you give people the freedom to choose, I think the data shows they'll come into the office on their own, but the experience has to be different.
I think, to me, the way that I'm going to interpret that is the answer is autonomy. Meaning whenever you force someone to be remote or you force someone into the office, that's where you're getting those resistance points. But if you just say, office remote, you figure it out on your own, that's where you're probably going to have the most success.
I think so. And there are always going to be people at the tails. And this is actually something that I realized after coming back from the Running Remote conference last year. Mm-hmm. I was talking with Chase, right? From Do It.
Chase Warrington from Twist, and Do It.
And that's talking with Chase and listening to that panel, and then more generally talking with the attendees of the conference, I realized that async in completely remote is a much more technical definition of work than I think many people use it. There is a deliberate effort to be in that end of the tail, right? Where people just, I need to be in my flow state. We try to minimize overlap. Everything is asynchronous as possible. We use applications to communicate with one another that don't have any status settings. There are no notifications. There's nothing to disrupt the flow. And I think where maybe you chose a job because of proximity, or you would move to where your job is, now that the global workforce is available, or vice versa, you can work globally as an employee. I think people are going to self-select into those tails if they want to. And so maybe some of these companies are signaling through their proclamations and their mandates to come back into the office. Maybe some people are going to want to go and work for those companies. But I think in the middle there, policies may be creating artificial data points like the ones that you're talking about that could be, manipulated to say one or the other. But it's more so because people want to reserve the autonomy to be able to pick and choose when they come in.
Yeah. Do you believe, going back to the conversation over meetings, do you believe that all meetings by definition are synchronous? Or do you think that there is a possibility space to be able to have, because I'm talking to a collaboration guy, right? That's your bread and butter. And I don't know whether or not that's, and it's just kind of pulling context of where I came from where I recognize synchronous meetings are by definition very expensive. Generally because whenever we actually meet synchronously, it means if we're doing it virtually, everyone actually has to be in the same space. So someone is bound to be on a call at 3 o'clock in the morning, which is really not opportunistic for them. Or we all fly into a location, which we just did 2 weeks ago, in which it actually takes 2 to 3 days for us to all sync up from our jet lag to be able to actually do productive work, which, I mean, that event cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to do in terms of, and we've paid it gladly. So I'm not necessarily saying that I don't believe in synchronous meetings and synchronous collaboration. I do, but I would love to hear your perspective on where you see that going, and particularly even from an academic perspective, even though there isn't much research on it.
Well, look, I think there's actually a lot to unpack in that statement, and there's another event I attended. It was a Fast Company thing here in the city. I remember sitting on a panel and they were talking about, who was it? It was a big global spirits brand. I forget exactly who it was, but they were talking about how I think they were based out in California, but they had developers in Estonia, and they were like, there were 2 developers on a team of 10 and the rest of them were not necessarily out in the Pacific time zone, but they were Pacific time zone adjacent, let's say. And it seemed to really be stressing the team because those 2 developers in Estonia always felt like they were on the short end of the stick whenever they were trying to figure out when should we meet, right? It was always at an inconvenient time for them. And it got me thinking, the whole global workforce is available to a company, but depending on your culture and depending on how async you want to be, maybe your policy or maybe the desires of what you want your culture to be are going to limit you there. Again, not that it's not available to you, but those are some of the things that you want to think about when, and that's how these things are interrelated, right? How do we want to run our meetings? Do we want to be more sync or do we want to be more async? So I think you've got, it depends how you want to frame the problem, right? It's just in like the meeting bubble. Like, should all meetings be synchronous or asynchronous, or what's our culture? And this again this is the why-based where. Like, why do we want to have our meetings this way? And then how do we want to structure our other policies, whether it's in person or virtual, or how global do we want our organization to be for purposes of practicality and culture building? So I think that's a really interesting consideration. In terms of the meeting, and I just also want to get, because I think hybrid gets used in a couple of different ways here. Like, I think there's a version of hybrid that means some days we're in the office, some days we're not in the office. But I think there's also another version of hybrid that means when I have a meeting, some people are in the same room and some people are dialed in, right? So there's a synchronous, same place, or same time, different place meaning of hybrid. And earlier I said hybrid is really, really hard. That's the kind of hybrid that's really, really hard. Like when you want to have a meeting. Now, in terms of meetings in general, a lot of meetings are a waste of time, right? And I think everybody says they want to be in the meeting, or they complain if they hear about a meeting they think they should have been in, they weren't in, right? But we all know you can't make all of the meetings all the time. And then there's also some meetings that just shouldn't happen. So I think what we've seen works best, especially in the virtual environment, because nobody really wants to be at your webinar. Meaning you should be doing some kind of work in the meeting, and not just having monologuers. So Dr. Joe Allen at the University of Utah, he's a meeting scientist, and he's got a handful of tips on what makes for a good meeting. They start and they end on time. There's a purpose, no monologuers, everybody gets heard. Now that's not just in terms of voice, but that's also in terms of place, right? The people, are they on the screen? Are they in the room? And humor, fun, some kind of humor, fun. And those are these universal elements of a good meeting. So what I'm going to say, from what I have witnessed anecdotally, non-academically, the feedback that I get when we have a session, and it could be a 3-hour session, 3.5 hours, the time flies by. And that's because they're working. They're not looking at each other in the Zoom tic-tac-toe Brady Bunch, right? Squares. You've got to come in there. You've got to have some dialogue, but there is a purpose to the meeting beyond listening to the presentation. And, you know, that's stuff now that we have to be more deliberate about is there content consumption that can be done on people's own time asynchronously. Then when we get together, either we need to collaborate and come up with something new, something emergent from that information that we've consumed. You know, maybe it's some kind of status report or new academic research that is going to have an impact on our industry. But then we come together and we either need to make sense of it. So how do we work through and do some sense making or decision making? Are we going to make a decision on this? And then it feels like we need to be together. And that's where the asynchronous, I can see groupthink developing. It maybe that's where, I wish I was at the meeting when we made the decision to do such and such. Now that can be virtual. So at the same time, it doesn't mean you had to fly people in. But I would say that, you know, have that purpose and make sure that purpose is it's going to engage people to do work, to move something forward, not to consume. I think we need to shift consumption into that asynchronous mode.
Dave, you'd be very happy and proud of me. So 2 weeks ago, as I said, we had our company retreat, and it's just fresh in my mind. So what we did is we use Asana, and we call them show and tells, meaning there are no show and tells in a meeting. We didn't fly all over planet Earth to sit in a room and watch someone that, you know, is giving a PowerPoint presentation that could have been a video. Right. So what we did is we had, and very specifically, I'm thinking about Product Day. We had about 3 hours of footage of different presentations of different stakeholders. And then from that, we identified issues, meaning off of this presentation that's 15 minutes or 20 minutes, we're going to have to make a decision. And here's the 3 different directions that we could possibly go in. And then we would debate that asynchronously on Asana. So it was on that system. But then when we actually got to the space, the collaborative space, we only addressed issues, meaning what are we planning on doing, not necessarily what's the agenda, how are we going to show everyone all of these different aspects of a particular issue. And everyone was read up on what that was. And if you weren't read up, you weren't allowed in the meeting. That was another part that actually was very difficult for some team members to deal with. And it was the other thing that was quite interesting is the way doing a meeting this way, and this is really the first time that we've ever done it post-COVID, is all of the issues that stayed up on the board were almost entirely EQ based. It was Liam's got an issue with Dave, and maybe we're not actually communicating it that way, but like Liam's got an issue with Dave because Dave is operating in this particular way that Liam doesn't agree with, and we've got to actually work that out in that meeting while they're in the room to be able to move forward on it. And I found that such an interesting phenomenon because really it just goes back to human, like emotional issues between team members, not necessarily the nuts and bolts of the business. It is the emotional state of different team members and how to solve for that.
And that is another one of the reasons. So I do a lot with design thinking, innovation, creativity. And so I get a lot of people asking, well, what's the best, how do we come up with the most creative idea? Right. And I've pushed back a little bit, and because there is data out there that says the most creative idea, they come from experts, right? Like experts in the field. Actually, very few transformational ideas come from we'll call them novices or intermediate. Most of the now again, not everything needs to be transformational when you're gonna meet, but the most creative ideas are often for those superstars who are taking a walk in the woods and they could I got it, right?
Right.
But a lot of times we're not looking for the most creative idea. We're looking for a good enough idea that gets the job done that we can implement. And so going back to your EQ piece, and there's something called the IKEA effect. And I think it's a research paper. I think the tagline is "When labor leads to love." So people buy into what they help create. And there was this research that was done that if you make a little turn, if you and I were building a piece of furniture and we share in the duties of turning the wrench on the IKEA furniture, we'll think that our credenza is way better than something that a master craftsman has made because we made that one. We turned the wrench on ours. So when you're looking not just for the most creative idea, but something that gets the job done and then move into an implementation phase, there is an EQ aspect of that. And so you can do it asynchronously, but a lot of times people feel really good in a meeting when they're with Post-it notes, or even if it's virtually, the digital version of the Post-it note. So that's another reason for that in person. Like it's not just the objective quality or the hygienic quality of the idea. It's then people have to implement it. At least for now, until the robots completely take over, there's still a, which is actually another, this whole, labor leads to love thing is going to come in with AI. And I think we're starting to see it. That instead of just giving us the answers, the AI needs to dial it back a little bit and lead us so we can say like, the AI asked me which color I wanted and I said it should be orange. And I chose the color on that, but the AI suggested in the collaborative tool what the bigger idea is. But the emotional piece in that buying in is another important aspect of coming together to meet for the practicality of it.
And I think that anyone that thinks that a lot of the critiques of asynchronous communication and management is that we're simply just automatons, that we are parts of the machine. And to a degree, that is correct. But I mean, we're human beings, right? So people's emotions get hurt from time to time. And that needs to be addressed. And it's not just in one-on-ones, it's a collaborative issue. And even some of these team members that actually have not met synchronously before or meet synchronously very, very rarely. We're talking about once a month. We can already see those egos get tarnished or those emotions get impacted. Right. And even when you're dealing with synchronous or asynchronous forms of communication. And it's such an interesting phenomenon, particularly from my perspective as the business owner, because I have almost no stake in a lot of these types of situations, right? I'm simply the person that's kind of looking at the environment as opposed to being in the business and maybe having some I don't know, emotional issues with a particular team member, because if you're the owner of the business, you can just fire anybody that you don't like, which is unfair, but very nice for me.
And something you never do.
Right, right. Never do that. So it's really interesting to kind of see how we bridge that, and it's something that, I mean, we're talking February of 2020 to now. This is the biggest experiment in work since the Industrial Revolution. 4% of the U.S. workforce was working remotely in February of 2020, and by March it was 45% of the U.S. workforce working remotely. That is the biggest transition in work since the Industrial Revolution.
And so fast. I think
that's the speed. Absolutely. So I think we're seeing, it's bound to be able to see that pushback. And I think we're experiencing that right now. The exact moment that I think I saw the conversation flip to in office was the leaked message from Elon Musk when he bought Twitter. Right. Saying, all of you guys need to stop pretending to work from home and come into the office. That's where it all kind of flipped over. Are you seeing, and I'm getting to a question here, are you seeing a nucleus of that? Because I think that a lot of people are not really giving the reasons, and we just talked about Research Forum, right? Talked about Slack's massive think tank, which was then purchased by Salesforce, obviously, to be able to talk about remote work. And I would probably say that is, in my opinion, the top source of academic research I've personally found on remote work, just in terms of its scale and its breadth. It's fantastic. If you haven't read the recent book, you should definitely read it. We had a whole bunch of copies that we gave away last year at Running Remote. What do you think the real key is for this push back to the office? Like, where do you think that there's a reason that no one is talking about? That's actually more of a specific question for you, because I believe there might be one or two reasons as to why people are going back to the office that they're not really talking about, but I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Why are these companies demanding people come back in?
So I think, yes. So
okay.
My perspective,
yeah.
and I'll bias you before I even kind of jump into it, is it's management. So when you look at the data, executives, VPs and above are very happy to stay remote. Your frontline workers are actually very happy to stay remote. And this is the Slack data. This is the future form data. Yes. 10,000 companies every quarter that they're analyzing. The people that are the most frustrated are the mid-managers.
Yeah, I remember reading this, like their experience has gotten worse over these last 2 years. Right?
Well, and it's because they can't really keep track of what people are doing. They're really inefficient at trying to understand how to be able to collaborate with team members, number one, and I think we're getting better at that, but more importantly, just keeping all of those team members accountable, whether it's through any form of measurement that you might think about. Literally just, I was in preparation for the Running Remote book, I asked a bunch of managers, what quantifiable metrics do you have on your people? Like, what do you measure? And I found that 60% measured nothing. Yeah. Like, they could not show me a spreadsheet. They could not show me how many sales did Dave get last week. I don't know. And it's just like, what?
It's feel, it's interaction. Do I like them?
Right. It's like, I mean, I think that's before, what you're getting to. Yeah, they were in the office and they were like, oh, that's Dave. Dave's at his desk and he's doing stuff. So cool. I know what Dave's doing. And I feel that is one of the reasons why there seems to be this pushback to the office. I also think the other reason is charisma bias disappears. Dave, I know from interacting with you, you're a pretty charismatic guy. You work in meetings, you work in collaboration. I am not that type of person. If I were to get into a debate, as an example, with, let's say, 8 other team members, I usually let I like to call them the Captain Americas take the lead, right? Mm-hmm. The 6'2" white guy, super charismatic guys that are just fantastic at actually leadership and telling everybody what to be able to do inside of the business. Those people usually have their ideas adopted, not necessarily because their ideas are better, but because the packaging of their ideas is so sexy, right? It's like, yes, we're going to go do this, and we're going to build Twitter for cats. It's called catter.com, and it's going to take over the world, right? Well, no, it's not. It's just that you're really good at convincing people of that fact. And I think a lot of middle managers have recognized that advantage disappears when people are working remotely. So those are my two biggest perspectives: is accountability and charisma bias disappearing are the two pieces that are creating this pushback to the office. But I'd love to hear your perspective.
I think those are, I don't know the answer. So for me to say that those are not wrong sounds like, I think that's absolutely true. I don't know. There is an emotional aspect to work, though, right?
Yeah.
That charisma, it's just as much of getting work done as a really good idea. But I think if I were to maybe phrase it different, it's something that we were used to. It is control, right? It is, that's, as a manager, that's how I used to read people. Is I would walk mm-hmm. around and I would have conversations. It was based on, like, did I like somebody? Were they more charismatic? I don't think you can pull those out. So, people would probably never admit to that, or at least not, they would do it anonymously, perhaps.
Well, this is my issue. Yeah. This is the core issue that is a problem for me, is that no one's admitting to any of this shit.
Right.
And it's like, let's all be honest about why we're going back to the office, and just provide those honest answers to people saying, listen, there's a different methodology for in-office versus remote. I am really good at reading people. That's what I've been doing for the past 25 years, and I'm amazing. And that's not me, but your average top tier manager. I'm really good at measuring people. I'm really good at understanding that type of nonverbal communication, as you had talked about before. And this is my superpower. And I no longer have that superpower when people are remote.
Right.
And it's making me less effective in my job. So therefore, I need people to come back to the office so that I can regain that EQ measure that I didn't have before. And that is absolutely fair, and absolutely something that, if you've done it for 25 years and you're really good at it, you should continue to do.
Yeah. And this
but
is
that's
where
the piece that no one admits.
Sure. And the people are they're coming at it from a power standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Not from a vulnerability standpoint. Like, if we're going to make you come back into the office, and I don't want to tell you, because I guess as you go up the chain, vulnerability goes down, right? It's kind of an inverse relationship. It should, but there's this paradigm, or this model of strength, corporate strength, what it means to be good, right? I think we see a lot of LinkedIn posts about being vulnerable and emotional intelligence, but I don't know that's always how it plays out in the corporate structure. So I think there's also a change fatigue, right? So because we're in this liminal phase, and I don't know if in 5, 10, 15 years, when we have different generations in these of leaders or the middle management, maybe they'll have this adapted skill set where they're just as good in person as they are online. This is something else that's come out of our research is, just in terms of job skills, you've got to be a good communicator in person, online, in a short text message, maybe a longer form email. You've got to be much more flexible when it comes to communication. And I think this is, maybe you have these middle managers who are just like, man, this is just way too much. There's so much change. Later into, I've established my paradigm I've established how to work, or how I get work done and how our team gets work done. And this is just one more change. And can't we just come back into the office and do it the way that I was used to doing it?
But to your point, March of 2020, biggest shift in work since the Industrial Revolution. So it makes perfect sense that you haven't learned all of these different methodologies. Yeah. And I don't think you will learn these methodologies in the next year, 2 years, 5 years, particularly if you spent 25 years doing it the other way, right? So it's a lot more complicated question, obviously, than we have time to be able to answer here. But I think by breaking down the real reasons as to why there is this pushback to the office can allow us to be able to, number one, not necessarily get on each other's nerves, where inside of the running remote community, we have a lot of what I would call fundamentalist remote work advocates, right? So people that are just drinking the Kool-Aid saying, hey, it's remote or nothing, it's got to be remote. I take a much more academic rigor towards these directions and really ask myself, well, what can we do to be able to allow people the autonomy to make their own decisions? And I think that's really the key to all of this, is them being able to make their own decisions, saying, hey, if I want to go back to the office, that's fine. If I don't want to go back to the office, that's also fine. Let's be able to figure out the best place for you to work. And unfortunately, that leaves the ownership of all of that on your middle managers, which are very overstressed at this point.
There's always in a tough spot, right? Being in the middle. I think it's going to be really interesting to see which companies stick with these policies and which people end up gravitating to them, and what that means in 10 years, or are they going to reverse course and kind of open up and have a more flexible situation? But I think that's on the flip side of these, I guess, bigger, more stalwart companies mandating people come back in the office. We have a choice. We think we have a choice now. We can work remote. There are a lot of companies that are emerging now, and they're being born out of this impetus. So, like, I don't like what Iger at Disney is saying about 4 days in a week. I'm going to start a new company, or I'm going to go work for another company that is more flexible, and I can be wherever I want, whenever I need to be. Right. So there should be. I don't know if it's equal, but I think people have options.
Absolutely.
To move around. Vote with your feet. Again, this is where you're right. It's like you hear things, or things get twisted. Data gets twisted in a research paper, as data often does, or you're in your LinkedIn bubble, so you have the options, but it's also hard to. I don't know. Do I want to go get another job, or maybe I should just go into the office? Maybe I should take the subway and go back to the 30-minute commute, because it's not bad working at Disney. This is all fascinating psychology of how people are going to be making decisions.
Oh, I'm excited about the next year. I got to tell you, this is obviously not as exciting as 2020, but it's probably the next most exciting year for remote work in the history of remote work. I got a couple fast fire questions for you in the last 10 minutes. Hopefully that doesn't scare you too much.
No,
but fast fire.
Sorry, you can edit this out. Did you ever watch Kilborn on the Late Show? What did he call it? Like the lightning round, and he would do 5 questions. Did you ever watch Craig Kilborn when he went to CBS?
Ironically, I do have 5 questions. So
that's what it was called, right? 5 questions.
So let's do it. Yeah, 5 super fast questions, Kilborn questions. Let's do it. Very quickly, what is a meeting to you?
It is when a group of people get together at the same time to talk about an idea or a set of ideas.
Cool. Mural, or something else?
I take the 5th.
That's a good one.
Look, we're working with a number of software vendors, and
you love them all.
I can't jeopardize any of these relationships just right now. They're all fantastic. Right. They all have their own use case. Can we say that? I
completely agree with that one. Yes, I completely agree. How much of your work week should you commit towards meetings?
Oh shit. I'm trying to phrase it in a pithy way. As long as they are, by your definition, productive, as long as you are getting work done in them, then you want to say you should have 40 hours worth of meeting? Probably not, but I don't think there is a time amount. I think there is a productivity amount that you should be looking at. There's like the marginal productivity. As long as the marginal productivity of your meetings continues to increase, then you should continue to have them, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, I want to do a follow-up on that then.
Yeah.
What would be a good marginal output for a meeting? Is there any way to measure it where we could say, oh, we've actually ticked over to we're just screwing around and we're not actually getting work done territory? Yeah.
I mean, I certainly think you should, it's going to vary, right? Like, did we set out the purpose for this meeting, and did we achieve the purpose for this meeting? So as long as you're going into the meetings and saying, we have a clear purpose and everybody thinks that that's a good purpose, as long as you continue to like check off by the end of the 30, 45, 90-minute meeting, like, oh, we did that thing. I think that's great. As long as everybody is getting, I guess, other stuff done, I think you're going to have to balance that. So it's going to be different for everybody. But I think by the fact of setting a goal and not setting the meeting unless you set a goal, you're going to force a degree of productivity. And then if it's just, hey, I've been on Zoom for too long, I've been fatigued, and so we can't get through and we can't maintain the discipline of having a good meeting, I think that's how you would measure it. Did we meet at the end of the meeting? Did we meet the goal that we set out at the beginning of the meeting or in the agenda that we set?
There's a really good company called Fellow that has a saying, which is no agenda, no attenda.
Right.
And I love that, because if I ever show up in a meeting where there's no agenda, I peace out within 5 minutes. That's super not valuable to me. Actually, we already touched on this one. What makes a meeting more successful? Last question. New rules for work. How can people participate if they are interested in participating in your massive study?
So newrulesforwork.com. First, go. It's a quick read. If you want to participate right now, we are looking for a couple of roles. We're about to roll out our experiment, which is a 60-minute meeting that we want to conduct as many times as possible around the world between April and end of June. So you can sign up to learn how to facilitate this meeting. So we need facilitators. You can sign up to be a participant, kind of like a general population meeting. And it'll be about an hour and a half. So you can be a participant in this meeting. You can also, if you are interested as a corporation, as an organization, we will come to you and we will conduct this meeting. We'll conduct it in person. We'll conduct it online. We'll conduct it in a hybrid situation. We'll give you a readout of the data so you can see how your people are working in those 3 different settings comparatively. And then let us know and we'll figure out the arrangements to make that happen. So newrulesforwork.com is the place to go to get started.
Awesome. I'd suggest everyone go and check it out. I mean, to me, I'm very interested in seeing the results, getting some really unbiased, academically rigorous data back. I think is going to be very interesting in understanding where we're supposed to go with regards to remote, hybrid, synchronous, asynchronous, all of this stuff. So very excited to be able to see the results of that. And if anyone else is interested in pursuing, in talking to you, Dave, in a personal manner, where do people find you on social media?
Email is probably the best way.
Or can you not?
You can.
No. A lot of, okay.
LinkedIn. Dave
All right.
Mastronardi. If you just want to email me, dave@gamestorming.group, dave@gamestorming.group. Email in the show notes. I don't know if...
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes for sure. Dave, thanks a lot for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And
it's good to catch
until
up
next
with
time.
you. Yes, thank you.